Welcome to Boston Post-Mortem. Anna, she's a 20-year AAA game industry veteran. 12 of those years, she's been in leadership roles. She's worked on everything from like MMOs to Sims. She's also worked internationally, and not internationally like a bunch of us have worked like remotely, because we're actually here and not internet. She was like in person across the ocean doing this stuff, which is a really cool thing to do. It's a big deal. She's also won awards for game writing, which is a really big deal, and wrote 2 books. And these 2 books are, I mean, they're really great. Title, The Pocket Mentor for Video Game Writers is one of them, and The Game Writing Guide is another one. And together, these can help get your foot on the ladder. Nowadays, writing for games is appreciated way more than it used to be. Back when like Quake and Doom, which were some of the first games that some of us played as far as like actually real-time graphics, story was not part of that at all. Anybody know what John Carmack, who's one of who's the lead programmer on those, what he said about story in games? He said, story in a game is like story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not important. Like, that was the attitude back then, because probably there wasn't the tech, but even like, when you see these games, like, yeah, you can put story in there. So fortunately, that attitude is gone. And with good writing, games are one of the most powerful ways of telling stories. And ideally, which is hard to do, but not just telling the story, but let players live it. That's like the ultimate. And so it's new technology. And writing for games, it's like a brand new field, really, in itself. So take it away, Anna.
Okay. Okay, let me know it all now so I can just. Can I actually respond to something you just said?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, back then there weren't really any game writers, because I don't think people understand that now, because game writing is its own field. But when I was getting my start, like, it didn't exist. You had designers who wrote, people like Tim Schafer, so there were actually talented designers who could write. But for the most part, the people who were designing were much better at design than they were at writing. And that did create opportunities, I think, for people like me to come in and say, hey, I could do something just as bad as that guy. And I did, yeah. So, but yeah, the landscape has certainly changed, but I think it's interesting to hear you say that, because I think most people don't understand how empty it was as a field at that point. There was nothing there.
So it's a Q&A, and we know there's going to be awkward silences, but so and it is going to be important to ask your questions like using a mic. But I'll start it off, because we've got a whole list of things which are not the only ones. Would you mind going over some of your career history?
Sure, I will walk you through the full resume. Just stop me if you feel yourself bothered. So I actually have not always been a game writer. I got my start as a bartender. I bartended for many years at everything from piano bars to raves. Like, I used to travel around the country doing raves in the forest with people, and not a lot of people drinking there, a lot of drugs, but they like their water. That was my job. But I still played video games, and I loved them. And I was playing one night, and the dialogue in it was really bad. It was painful, and the joke I just made about I could write something that badly, that's what I thought, and it really hit me like, someone has to write this stuff. And because the bar seemed pretty low at the time, based on what I was seeing, I'm like, I could write that stuff. And so I started asking around, saying, hey, I want to be a game writer, what do I do? And I got a lot of people very condescendingly saying to me, I think you need game designer. And I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure I'm a game writer. But no one had any idea what to do. Like, you couldn't go to school for it. It just didn't exist at that time. So I left bartending and I went back to school at Smith, like this person who's currently at my alma mater. And I cobbled together my own sort of game writing degree. I minored in computer science and I majored in English language and literature. And I graduated, I was actually working as a tester the entire time I was in school, how I paid for it partly, for a company called Cyberlore that was based in Northampton, out in Western Mass. My first game writing job, Brenda Romero. She was Brenda, yes, you know her? Yes, big thumbs up from the back there. She was Brenda Braithwaite at the time, but she was the lead designer on Playboy the Mansion, which was my very first game. It was a sin. You played as Hugh Hefner, and you had your magazine empire, and you photo shoots, and it was my introduction to games. And actually, Brenda's a very thoughtful designer, so it was a great game to get my start on. And I went from there. I went to school, of course, and I started working for a company called Affiliated Pictures, and they did Flash-based browser games. Everyone remember Flash? It's not just a hallucination. But yeah, I worked on a game called, I worked on Hulu's Pet Shop VIPs. Oh, man, yeah. I had to write a newspaper for it, and so I would have to listen to that saccharine voice over and over again to be like, okay, I got it now. When you're buying things from the store, yeah. But I loved it. That was the first game writing I ever did, was the newspaper for Hulu's Pet Shop. And then I also worked on Planet Casmo, which was a cool game for tweens, the unexplored tween market, where I really learned a lot about how rotten kids are. And I learned a lot, because when you're working at a small company like that, you wear many hats. And so I got a chance to try out a bunch of different roles while I was there. But I was kind of stuck there because I was living in a small town in Western Massachusetts, and I had big dreams, much bigger than I was going to be able to fulfill there. So I moved to Seattle. I just picked up and moved to Seattle, didn't know anyone there, had no prospects, nothing, just rolled the dice and moved out there. And I managed to get a job within a few weeks in the lot check department at Nintendo of America, where I play tested games and I checked manuals and made sure no one had seizures and all the really fun stuff you get to do there. And I was there just for a brief time, but in that brief time I got to work on dozens and dozens of games, because that's what you do. They move them through really quickly to get certification. And I got a chance to, write a lot of notes about the stories and what was in the manuals and be really thoughtful about the writing that was in them. And that led to a job as an editor, a QA editor. I think now the role is called narrative editor at most studios. But I was working for ArenaNet. They hired me to do that, and that was the first place I actually got to do real narrative work on a game. And I started out there as QA on the original Guild Wars, and then they hired me up into the writing team on Guild Wars 2 after I had proven by writing really terrible poetry for their festivals that I was going to write. I also wrote the lore Bible for Guild Wars 2, and that was my first experience getting to do that. 90 pages of love, and detailed lore. And I was at ArenaNet for, I think, close to 3 years, and I left there and went to work on for a company called Airtight Games, also in Seattle, and it was a murder mystery game called Murdered, the Sole Suspect, about a ghost trying to solve his own murder. It has not been well received by critics. I'll just leave it at that. But it had a cat in it, which was way ahead of its time. And so from there, I took a brief trip up to Quebec City in Canada, and I briefly worked on sort of the second writing team for what would eventually become Assassin's Creed Syndicate. It was Victory when I was working on it. And from there, I burned out pretty hard because I've been going full steam for a while. And so I went back home to Washington, D.C. and sort of regrouped. And I left the industry for a while. I left AAA. I wasn't sure it was for me. I was so burned out. I didn't know what to do with my life. And I did a lot of games, adjacent games while I was in DC. I worked at an art gallery on installations there, which is sort of like a video game that you can walk through. Yeah, it was really, really amazing. And I worked on some serious games for a place I'm not allowed to talk about, and I still wonder what they did with those games. Just what would you do in this scenario sort of game? And what else did I do while I was there? I ghostwrote a novel. How could I forget? Ghostwrote a novel. So I also can't talk about. But for obvious reasons. But it was a really good time, and I think the writing that I did during that period is probably some of the best I've ever done because it was for me. And it was what I wanted to write, and I wasn't writing to order, which is what you have to do when you're writing a game, because you're just one tiny cog in this big machine. And so I thought, well, I kind of like this writing thing, and I kind of only want to write video games. Maybe I should get back into it. And I very fortunately was hit up by Arcane Studios. They were working on just a DLC for the next Dishonored 2 had just come out, and they were looking for someone. And they said, "Are you interested?" And I said, "I'm interested." And so I flew out to Lyon, got a quick crash course in what they were doing with it. And Hazel Montfortin and I split the work and wrote the entire DLC. I think it was 5 months. From start to finish. I wrote the first draft of the entire screenplay for the game in like 3 weeks, I think. So I do not recommend it, but it was like, welcome back to AAA. There you go, right back in feet first. But that was a really special project with an incredible team. Everyone was just brilliant. It was an all-woman team too, which was the first time I ever had that in games. And it was really well received, critically acclaimed.
It's so good.
Oh, thank you. I'm really proud of the writing that I did on it. And I was considering staying there and working on their next project, which unbeknownst to me at the time was Deathloop. But then Remedy came knocking on my door, and they flew me out to Finland, and I interviewed with them after one of the most disastrous flights I've ever had, which I cut my hand open, it was a whole thing. Yeah, and then bright and early the next morning, and I still had to work. I was still doing work on Dishonored while I was flying. It was a mess. But I rolled into the job interview the next morning, and they showed me a PowerPoint presentation for what would later become Control. And at that point, it was just a few slides, some concept art, and like a twinkle in Sam Lake's eye, and I knew I had to work on that game. And I picked up everything and moved to Helsinki to work on it. And it was an amazing experience. I'm incredibly proud of everything I did for that game. It's the most me game I think I've ever made. Deeply, profoundly weird, and funny and twisted, and it has puppets. And someone asked me how to sneak a puppet show into a game, so I'm dying to tell that story. And so from Remedy, I took a trip over to Sweden, and I worked for Massive Games in Malmö for a little while. I worked on the Avatar project, which was my first time working on a real franchise like that, like an IP where you had to go to Hollywood and sit in a room and read a script from red paper because you're not allowed to take it out of the building, and you can't take photographs, so you're just trying to memorize the whole thing and imprint it on your brain. But it was interesting, and to be a part of a phenomenon that big and that well known, I think was like the first time I'd ever had that experience. So I really enjoyed that. And then while I was there, I saw that Playground Games was making another Fable. And I love the original Fable games. They were a huge inspiration for me. That kind of humor, I think, you don't see a lot in video games. So I started talking to them, and things just worked out. So I moved to England, and I lived in this tiny little town in England called Leamington Spa. Oh, I'm sorry, Royal Leamington Spa. And I lived there for several years until, guess what, it burned down. And I came back to the US to DC again, came home, got back on my feet. Didn't take as long this time. I knew the signs, I didn't let it get as bad, I took care of myself. And within a few months, I was ready to go again, and I got hired by CD Projekt Red, which is how I ended up here in Boston working on Cyberpunk 2. And that brings us here. We are now all caught up.
I guess I actually want to ask about burnout. Like, what did you do during that burnout time? Maybe the first one, like, how long was that? What did you do to feel better? And then the second time, how did that inform it?
It was 2 years, the first time that I burned out before I felt well again. It was probably about 6 months where I just was barely functioning. This was a while ago. This was back in 2014 when I burned out the first time, and it had been a long time coming. I mean, I worked really hard through college. I worked like 3 or 4 jobs and went to school full time, and was trying to build a career. And then I just rolled right into AAA. So it had been building up for a while. I didn't know what it was. People didn't talk about it back then the way we fortunately talk about it now. I didn't know what the symptoms were. I just knew I didn't feel right anymore, that I didn't care about anything. And then my cat died, and that just pushed me over the edge. And so I went back to DC, and I just did a lot of nothing. Like, that's the thing to do. You have to refill that well again. So I just read and watched dumb movies and hung out with my friends and, kept my hand in writing personal stuff, as I mentioned. But it's really all about resting and not forcing yourself to be creative and making sure that that's just sort of building up and you have things to draw on again. But it is also a medical condition, and what I know now that I did different the second time is I went and I got medical help. Which makes a huge difference, They put me on some anti-anxiety medication, which really helped a lot. I can tell you, best sleep I've ever had. And I just got out of it sooner. I didn't push myself to the point where I was having, anxiety attacks or dissociating or any of the things that happened to me the first time around. I didn't let it get that bad. I went to my company and I said, hey, I'm burning out, I just can't do this anymore, I need to step back. And they were like, could you just take a little break? And so I tried that. I took a break for a couple of months and then came back to work. But you just burn out where the same processes are there, the same habits are there, and I just burned out all over again. And it didn't seem fair to them, and it certainly wasn't fair to me, and so I came home. And that's exactly what I needed, and hung out with my friends and drank a lot of beer, just, play more video games. And it just, for me, reading is the healing thing. It's just revisiting books that I love and reading new books that I love and talking about them with people, because I don't get to do a lot of that when I'm working. So, but everyone has their own way of doing it. And I know some people really just need to check out for a really long time. But yeah, I would say go to a doctor, catch it early, go to a doctor, and then do what feels good to you and helps you relax and refill that creative well. Yes, in the back.
For those moments where you were in between jobs and kind of moving around from place to place, looking for the next opportunity, what kept you going? Because I can't imagine having to go from one opportunity to the next and working and then just okay, it's time to pack my bags and move on to the next thing.
It's not for everybody. It's hard to live abroad. It's hard to live abroad in a country where you don't speak the language. There were times when I would be walking through the town center in Helsinki and there'd be 20 languages being spoken all around me, and it just felt like Babel, just this wall of sound coming at me. And it can be overwhelming. You have to make connections with people and find your community, and you have to really like new things and not be afraid of looking like an idiot, which is a really key part of it. Because you're gonna do dumb things and you don't know their culture, you're gonna mess up. But in terms of finding the job, it's different now than it was when I was doing this, and I want to be really clear about that. Like you could find a job when I was looking, like there were jobs. And I would usually plan about 6 months out. Be like, okay, my project's gonna end at this time, so 6 months out I need to start looking. Because it would take about 2 or 3 months to get the job and then a few months to move. And if you're living abroad, they sometimes make you sign a contract where you have to give them 6 months notice, which is what happened when I was in Sweden. So I was hired for Fable, but I couldn't start working there. I think it was 7 months later that I was actually able to move to England and start working there. So sometimes you're just bursting to tell people that you have this new job and it's like way off in the future before you can say anything. But planning helps. Having a decent job market helps. And I've done some freelance work too, and I know a lot of freelancers, and they're constantly hustling and looking for jobs. And that wasn't for me because I think there is a lot of anxiety that goes with that. Even while you're working on the job, you're always trying to line up that next job, and not just one, but like the next 3 or 4, and you just get enough money together to pay the rent. It's not for everybody, and the elephant in the room right now is the current state of the job market in the games industry, which, just to validate what a lot of you are going through, is grim. Like, this is historic, right? The industry has never gone through anything like this. I have no advice to give you because this has never happened before, and all I can say is keep trying and maybe it'll turn around, but I think we're going to come out of this into a very different landscape than it has been. I think we've seen that a lot of studios have closed. AAA, there aren't that many of the big studios left standing. And it's really strange. Like, I think about where would I go if I were to leave where I am now. I'm not going to leave, if you all see that, I'm not going anywhere. But if I were, like, where would I go? There aren't that many studios left to make the kind of games that I'm really good at making. There's really only a handful. These story-driven, big, massive AAA games with open worlds, like, Ubisoft has folded. A lot of the other big studios have folded. It's just, where do you go? And if I'm thinking that, I can't imagine what it's like, to be fresh out of school with your degree and you're ready to go and there's like nothing. And then the job that you're out for, because so many people are laid off, you're competing against game devs with 25 years of experience who are applying for that mid-level role because there's nothing else. So all I can say is it's true, it is happening, and we see that, and it sucks. And all you can do is keep getting better, work with people, build up your portfolio, build up your skills, and be ready for when that opportunity does come along. There's no shame in taking a day job. I hear so many people say, oh, I'm gonna have to leave, I'm gonna have to work in a cafe, and I'm like, I was a bartender for years. I left the industry and did all kinds of odd jobs. I worked in cafes. There's no shame to that. You do what you have to do to create the art that you love, and that's all that matters at the end of the day. If you're doing it in AAA, if you're doing it for yourself in your basement, it doesn't matter, it's your art. So do what you have to do to make it. And I know that this isn't the cheerful pep talk that I should give people, but I don't think it does anyone any favors if I'm not realistic about this. Because you all know what's going on. People are out there applying for jobs and getting shut down, and I think it helps to hear the truth, that it's not you, that it's the market, and there's nothing wrong with you or the things that you're doing. I hope it helps to hear that, because it helps me to say it. Yeah.
Helps me feel better.
Yeah. Good luck. Yes.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
The first is, where in DC are you from?
My family was right on DuPont Circle.
I'm from Bethesda.
No
So,
way.
yeah.
Convenient.
Yes,
There
very
is a big
convenient.
studio there. Yes.
Yeah, they're not actually in Bethesda anymore. They're in
Oh.
Rockville.
They are not
Yeah, they moved out of Bethesda. Yeah, they should change their name, but oh well.
It's all
It's all a lie.
It's all a lie.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
But the real question was, the real question was, what kind of writing do you find yourself doing most often? Because I obviously haven't worked on like a real people project, but it seems, I'm not sure if it's all world building or dialogue or a secret third option.
All of the above is the secret third option. So I think it depends on what role you have on the project. If you're a junior, you're going to come in and write a lot of item descriptions and barks and a lot of systemic writing, and that's cool. And you're going to learn about the other stuff, and you'll get to write some dialogue and some ambient scenes. And then you'll move up and you'll get to own like an entire quest line, and you'll get to write the character bios for that, and the location descriptions, and all the cinematics and dialogue for everything there. And then as a senior writer, you're going to own entire sections of the game, and so you're going to probably write these briefs that are, a story treatment for the section of the game that you own. And you'll write everything in that, from soup to nuts, from starting out with this idea, this pitch that you're going to give for what's going to happen here, to the final polish on the dialogue as it goes out to the studio. As a lead writer, I don't get to write as much anymore, but I get to write the story, which is really cool. And I get to decide what the story of the game is, and that's the good stuff. I have been a narrative lead, which is sort of where the vision comes from. It's like, yes, we are going to have a story about this, and we'll have these themes, and yes, my minions, please make this thing, make it wonderful while you're at it. But I actually prefer being a lead writer because I get to keep my hands in the play and actually do the work and do the writing and mentor the writers and help them, learn the style that we've decided to have for that game. And, you write examples of every kind of thing so that people are like, oh, that's what she wants when she asks for a bio. Now I see. And you always pick one little thing in the game that's yours, that you get to own completely, like maybe one small mission or one character or something. And, that's where you get to still really express yourself. But yeah, the higher up you go, the less actual writing you do. It's one of those curses of being in management.
I mean, one of the things that stressed me the most, or more anyway, of a bunch, whenever I had to manage people, or I was more of like a management role, and not actually making stuff, which is why we get into all this stuff. You want to you're world building with, you're either creating art or you 2D, 3D, whatever you're doing, or you're working with a level editor and building things, or all that stuff. It's like when other people are doing it and you're just kind of like overseeing what they're doing, it's kind of stressful because I want to be actually doing that. Did you have situations where you think some of the stress may have been because of that? Because you're not really doing the heads down writing, which you love to do.
Yeah, you're spending all your time in meetings. Or you're looking at someone else's work and you know that they're learning, that they're trying to do it, but you think, I could do this. I could knock this out in 10 minutes, no problem. But you can't let yourself do that because people have to learn. So there is a certain frustration to that. But I think that's the trade-off, right? You get to have more control over the sort of big vision, but then you have less actual creative work to do. So it's tough. Stay in the middle, that's the sweet spot.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yes.
Just going off a word that you just said there, control. What, using a more concrete example, what sort of work did you do on control, and what was your piece?
I think everyone knows my piece was the puppet show. So the Threshold kids are my twisted, lovely children. I just adore them. They are probably the most me thing that's ever been in a game. I have a whole post about it on my blog, on my website. But I started early, so I was narrative lead on Control, and I wrote the story bubble for Control. I took all the ideas that everyone had, synthesized them into one sort of living document, and sort of cemented the vision for what it was. I put together a writing team, and I oversaw their work on it. So that was my job on Control, but the puppets, since you asked, not in so many words, but I really please. The the puppet show really was a classic example, I think, of something that the lead gets this like wild idea about, and then like no one can tell them no, and it just ends up happening. Because I kept saying, the idea came from Eddie Corkelman, who is now the, I think, lead narrative designer at Housemarque. And we came out of a meeting one day where we were trying to explain something super complicated about Viola's house, and like probably what is a threshold is my guess. And people were just like, and Abby said, next time we should use hand puppets. And I'm like, puppets, you said. And like the idea just stuck in my head, and like I couldn't get rid of it. And I kept pitching the idea to people, and it was not going over. This like janky puppet show in the middle of a big glossy AAA game, especially Remedy. I mean, Sam has a very elevated aesthetic, and like he would not say no, but he would not say yes. He'd be like, okay, yes, I'll think about it. And so I just kept, trying to get the idea to float. No one was buying it, and finally one day, someone who was off in the cinematics department wandered over, and he's like, puppets. You say you want puppets. I know something about puppets. And it turned out that the hometown he grew up in, this small tiny town somewhere in Eastern Europe, puppets were like their thing. They put on an annual puppet show, and like it was considered an art thing, or they took pride in it. And so he took up the banner of my puppet show and really made it happen. And once it went out to the wider team, they just made it so much better than what I had pictured. I was picturing a scientist in the lab there, like took a test tube and put some like yarn on it, like, oh, Mr. Bones, right? But they made these really beautiful puppets, and they filmed it like it was an old VHS tape, and it just, the writer Clay Murphy did some great dialogue for it based on the designs that I had, and it just came out with perfection. So. And my favorite thing is watching people scream when they see the videos in the oldest house and they pull up their guns and they shoot the TV so they won't play. So thank you for asking.
I'm jumping off this because you talked about working in teams. On a team, everyone will give you writing notes. Mm-hmm. Some of those people have not even written a short story or tried. Yes. What are some ways that you integrate those notes, even if they come from people who don't have the vocabulary that someone who has done a lot of writing notes?
I know what you're trying not to say.
Try to be nice. I wrote a meaner version of this. This is a nice version.
Just don't make me respect this one. So you do get a lot of notes from people, and generally, you get flooded with notes. And the problem with writing is that everybody writes, right? Everyone writes. They write emails. They write all the time. Anyone can write. And so they write a book, maybe 2 books, and about writing, and they come to you and they have ideas for how you can improve your story. And you listen to them very politely, and you just ignore those people. Those are not people you have to take seriously because they don't know what they're talking about. And what you're looking for in feedback is a pattern, right? A lot of people feel this way. A lot of people have noticed this. It's causing a reaction that's fairly widespread. And those are the notes you need to take on board. And not one person who's just got a real single problem. Ryan is talking about the people whose opinions you cannot ignore. Sometimes there's an executive who's also read that book, and he comes to you and he has some very strong ideas about something that he wants in the story or in the game. And your job is to figure out how to incorporate what it is that this person wants in a way that doesn't break your story. And usually it's just about digging into the idea and understanding what it is that they really want, because they think they know what they want. But usually when you dig in, they're like, oh, this moment is just missing something. They don't actually want you to blow up the schoolyard or the puppy orphanage or whatever it is that they've decided. They just want a big spectacular moment there. And it's like, oh, okay, well, that's fine then. We can put something in there that tonally and thematically fits in with the rest of the game and isn't going to slaughter a bunch of orphan puppies. So it really is trying to find the note behind the note, as we say, and react to that, and then figure out a way to give them what they want so that you want to make them happy, but you're not destroying your game in order to do it. And there's usually a way to do that. I can only think of maybe twice when I wasn't able to do it and I just had to include the thing.
Do you find that it's sort of like game playtests in that way? Because what you're saying sounds like advice I've received, whether or not I've been able to implement.
It is exactly like that. I mean, people, when they're reading it, are in a sense playtesting your story, right? You know, they're experiencing it in a way, and you know, you want their feedback. A lot of what we do is just putting notes on other people's work and then responding to that. I mean, that is our version of playtesting as writers. Yes.
So you talked about how you have to kind of take executives' feedback, but you know, when working on large games, you also have producers and cinematics and programmers and developers. How do you kind of take everybody's feedback, because you have so many like words coming in left and right, and decide this is how we're going to do it, and it's possible because you know you have to work with the developers, executives.
I run away. I run far. No, I mean, what you do is you set up proper channels for this feedback to come in, right? And you have someone gather it and collate it and look for patterns in it, because it can become overwhelming. And you can get really caught up in just trying to please this one person because they're important at the studio. And you really have to be able to step back and say, you know, this person is really bothered by it, but like 75% of the people reading it really love it. So, you know, maybe we should just keep it in there and see how it flies. And actual playtesting too, because it's one thing when it's on the page, it's always perfect on the page, it's beautiful. But you know, things happen when you start migrating it into the game. You have to rely on systems, and sometimes things don't work out the way you want, and things can't get implemented properly, or you know, a feature you thought you were going to have gets cut, and or an entire section of the game gets cut, and you have to sort of staple it all together and make it make sense. So playtesting is really important to make sure that this ideal that you have, this platonic ideal in your head, is sort of in some mutated form or other, making it to the player, and that they are experiencing things the way you want them to. But yeah, you can't. I just ignore the producers.
And even like CEOs will walk around and they'll comment on things, but you can't just like jump and start doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
You talk to your producer, you talk to the lead designer, the lead writer, you know, it's gotta go through channels.
Yeah.
Because I've seen people like start jumping into, oh, he just came by and we gotta have fish jumping out of the river. I'm like, okay. Just, go through channels.
Yeah, and sometimes feedback takes a while to get to you. Like when I was talking about working at Massive, we have the studio with our creative director, but we also had James Cameron's company out in Los Angeles. And we also had Ubisoft Editorial, which was based in Paris. And so we essentially had three bosses we had to please. And sometimes they weren't completely aligned. And sometimes it would take 6 months to get feedback from James Cameron's group because they were working on other things, amazingly enough. And so you've gone ahead and, you know, done what you can and implemented your story and it's in the game. And then you'll get a bunch of notes saying, absolutely not, you can't use that, we're using that in this film, or, you know, that just completely breaks our lore, or I just don't like that name, or whatever it is that the feedback is. That's when it becomes a real problem because a lot of people have put a lot of work into it and you have to rip it out at that point. And then it becomes surgery, right? Just trying to make incisions and surgically cut out as little as you possibly can and, you know, sort of sew it back up again. But it can be a real problem. So yeah, get feedback early and often is my advice. Yes?
So in the last few years as a writer in AAA, I guess maybe another like grim industry elephant in the room, but how have you experienced like the encroachment of like AI as I guess pitched by executives, or just kind of as it begins to spread around the industry?
So I am one of the people whose work was stolen by these companies and fed into their AI to enable other people to mimic my style. So I wear natural enemies, I would say, in this ecosystem. I am incredibly fortunate, and I have to be very careful how I say this. I'm incredibly fortunate that I have not felt any pressure in any role that I have had to use AI. None at all. People have hired me for my expertise, and they have hired me for what I can do, and that is what they want, and I've been extremely lucky that that has been appreciated and valued. But I will also say that AI is the best case against AI. And all you have to do is experiment with it. And in the situations that you find within a game studio, and it simply cannot do what we would need it to do. It saves neither time nor money. And it's really easy to demonstrate that, as I have been able to on multiple occasions. So perhaps someday if it evolves and I don't destroy it as my enemy, then we could reconsider it. But it genuinely has not been a pressure for me in my career at the places that I have worked. I know that many of my colleagues have been pressured and are being forced to use it, I'll just say it, many of them against their will. I think people are still really sort of struggling in terms of like dialogue and narrative to find out where it's really useful. Because like you can't take it into the studio, it can't rewrite lines on the fly for an actor. You have to double check everything that it writes, so you might as well just do it yourself. And what's especially pernicious about it is that it never can do anything truly original, and that's the magic of games, right? Is creating something that no one has ever seen before, an experience that no one's ever really had before. We can do that in game worlds, and it can only remix what it already knows. And so, I don't know, I value human-made work. I truly do, and I've been fortunate enough to have that.
Like, does anybody want to play a game where you can have endless conversations with the NPCs forever? Who would want that?
They
Probably feasible, but yeah.
There's a good reason you don't want that. Game writing is about education as much as it is about entertainment. You are telling people what to do next and where to go, and messaging what's important, and helping them sort of sift out the signal from the noise. And if you're talking to an NPC who has a whole bunch to say, you're like, oh, this NPC is important, right? And if every NPC does that, my God, after 10 minutes, you've made it 5 feet down the road, and like, you're never going to finish that game. And you can't really control what they're going to say either. They could break the lore, they could ruin the story and tell you the ending right there. Like, you just don't know. And I think people sometimes like the idea of that more than they would actually like the reality.
In fact, a broken AI game might be a good kind of game. Think about it. Actually, there was you had your hand raised.
Throughout your career, there's obviously been a lot of material you've written that did not make it into the final cut. Are there any that you're really proud of that you're able to talk about?
No. I'm sorry, and I mean that I can't talk about them, not that I'm not proud of anything. I do have a graveyard of cut work, and what I do is try to actually work it into another project to make sure that it does get seen eventually. But yeah, even the bad stuff that I write, I'm proud of. I think if you've ever been through burnout, just every day that you write is a real victory. So I still feel that when I'm writing, even if it's crap, it's like it's fine. I wrote that crap. Look at that. It's amazing.
Up there, I guess in the last row, and then we'll. Vadim, yeah, go for it.
So I don't know how well you know this, but in game writing based on localization, like if there would be like a game like, let's say Assassin's Creed, like where they have dialogue from writing in English, and then what would happen for like the same game with different language, like in Spanish, French, German, Italian, or even Japanese? Like how would the localization, how would the game writing go for the localization for these games, and what they be? And would the writings be like same or different for the dialogue in the writing?
So localization is an art, and so you have teams of localizers who speak that language, preferably natively, and they are given the English text or whatever the original language is, and it's their job to translate that in a way that also translates culturally, right? So it's not just directly translating the words, it's like, how would this joke make sense to someone who's never experienced this thing? What would that be in their culture? And a lot of what we do as writers once we're in that localization phase is answer questions about why is this joke funny, which I will tell you is a really humiliating experience. Never have to explain a joke, it's probably not that funny. And they, right, even if it was good, it's not by the end. But that's what we do, explaining what this name means, and then they have to figure out how to translate that into something similar in their language. So yeah, it's just teams of localizers who really understand the local culture, who work with the original writing team and with producers to get answers so that they can make that cultural transition.
Thank you.
You mentioned a couple times reading, and reading as kind of a refilling of the creative content.
Mm-hmm.
So, in light of your current project, what have you been reading?
I cannot talk about anything I've been reading for the project, but I am currently reading Midnatt's Biblioteca, which is the Midnight Library in English, I think. I was just in the Nordics over Christmas and I picked up a whole bunch of books in Norwegian, and I'm just trying to brush up on my language in case I have to get out of Dodge really fast. Yeah, so that's what I'm reading right now. I also, and this will be of interest to all of you, did you know that you can rent out quarter square books for $50? And then you can take that $50 and put it toward book purchases?
What?
Yes, it's wild. So you can rent out the bookstore and have your friends there after hours to do whatever you want. You can just go shopping or have a book club or, I don't know, run naked through it. I don't know. I'm sure they would appreciate that. But yeah, I did that recently with a bunch of my friends, and the condition of my arranging that was that they all had to recommend one book for me. Bryant was there, Carly was there. I forced them to choose books. And so I have this huge stack of books that people picked out for me that I am trying to go through right now. And it's delightful, like books I never would have thought to get for myself.
I have a question about video games as a medium for storytelling. I hope it's not too elementary for everybody here. I'm kind of an outsider looking in right now. I'm a screenwriter in film and television, but you see a lot of, with the success of Last of Us and Fallout, it's kind of coming together. And I'm kind of curious about what's unique in game writing and the advantages and the disadvantages that you have in that world. And you're obviously working with people, and if you came up with an idea that you can't do in video games, like where do you go from that? So I'm just kind of curious if you could talk to that broadly.
So we do have a lot of people who come over from TV and film and work in games, and the thing that I see them struggle with the most is interactivity. Because the player is experiencing things in a way they have to make decisions, they have to move around the world, they are actually interacting with it in a way they're not being they're not a passive consumer of the medium. Not to say that that is true for film, like there is obviously, it's not just a passive thing. I have been lectured on that, so I want to say that for the record to everyone. But if you ever play a game like Brothers, have you played that?
I have, yeah.
Tale of Two Sons.
Yeah.
What they do at the end of that game, when, big spoiler, I hope you've played it, when your older brother dies, is they use the mechanics of the game to produce an emotional reaction. And they have transcended sort of the medium in that way. And you get this visceral gut reaction to the death because you're feeling his loss as you're moving the joysticks on the controller, and suddenly you have to move them both because your brother's not there. And it's awkward and it's clumsy, and you feel it in a way that you could not feel with film. It's impossible. And that's what games can do. And for me, that's like the holy grail. It's like, how can I find those moments where games are doing something that other media cannot do? And Does anyone here know John Ingold, or are you aware of his? Yes, well, I know you know. Yeah. Well, he recently collected a bunch of stories from game writers of all levels and compiled them into this book called The Game Narrative Kaleidoscope. And I was one of the people who contributed, and I wrote my little short 500 words when I was sick with the flu and a high fever, and I just played a highly acclaimed game that made me very angry. So I went off on a little bit of a rant, which is in the book if you want to read it. I didn't name it, and I'm not going to name it now. But I was stunned to find that this critically acclaimed game that so many people love, the last half hour of the game was nothing but cutscenes. It was a film, broken up occasionally by some boss fights. And I just sat there holding the controller, just passively absorbing it. And I thought, this is what we're doing in 2026? Like, this is still an acceptable thing? And it really shocked me. And it shocked me that the creators of that game would leave so many vectors for communication untouched. They just left them on the table. Like, there's this feast there. They're like, oh, I'll just have this pea, thank you very much. And then wandered away. And I was so disappointed by that, because when I'm making a game, I want to use every single tool that I've got. I'm going to use the UI to tell my story. You know, I'm going to use the music. I'm going to use, you give me a black screen, I'm going to use that to make a point somewhere in the game. And I firmly believe that, and that we have tools in games that film doesn't have. I mean, just like you have things that we can do. You have the reassurance that the player is not gonna like see your film out of order. It's gonna happen in the way you choose it. I have no guarantee. So yeah, I'd say if you were coming over to games from film, that interactivity would be the thing to really delve into.
What about coming from TTRPG writing into game writing?
That is also a crossover that I see a lot of people make. Keith, I might call on you. Do you have TTRPG people? Keith is from my current company. He formerly Molasses Blood, and now CDPR. Do you have a lot of crossover on the people that you work with? No? Okay, you are my host.
Sorry.
But I do know a lot of people who have made that move. I mean, RPGs are a thing, right? I think the biggest problem that I see is that you have to really hold people's interest when they're playing a video game, especially in film. You know, there's a million distractions, and when you're writing for a TTRPG, it's much more literary, it's much more scholarly, people are going to read it. There's a different attention span that they're giving to that. If you're playing a video game and you're fighting one moment, you know, you don't want to stop and read this really long lore dump and then go off and do something else, right? You have to unload a lot of information in a really short space, in a way that feels very entertaining, and people don't realize that they're being educated. So you have to learn that, but I've seen people make that leap a lot. I know several people who have. No, I thought I'd use someone, but no.
Just to tie back to a concrete example, what are some things in not puppets? It may be puppets. What are some things in Control that made you feel like you were using every part of the buffalo?
Oh, that's a good question. For me, every single part of the game is an expression of the core themes of the game. I look at a piece of a screenshot from Control, and I see all of our themes there. In any screenshot that anyone gives me, I can see them there. It's order versus chaos, right? It's the order of the brutalist architecture of the oldest house versus the chaotic red swirl of the hiss, right? It's everywhere, from the art to the characters we've created, to the way the combatants move, to the things that people talk about, to the way the story treats these things. It is there in every single part of it. And I think it is the truest expression of themes that I've ever seen in a game. Like, from where it was when I was writing that story Bible to the game that actually shipped, it's it's a straight line. Like the adherence to themes never wavered, and it's kind of astonishing when you see what games go through. But yeah, I couldn't single out one part because I think it's everywhere. It's everywhere in that game.
Thank you.
John.
Thank you so much for saying anything about theme. It's so critical.
Yeah.
I want to ask then, because I've never worked on a larger group, with a large team. When there's a theme, when it's established, like you have, how does that get maintained? Like throughout, how do we go from, hey, here's the theme and the idea, to what you just described, and it's everywhere?
I mean, a lot of it is establishing the game vision very firmly in the beginning. I think one of the reasons Control was able to be so true to it is because, Stanley had a vision for it, and he was that vision holder, and this is gonna sound, like I'm a stuck up, but he truly is a visionary. Like, he has a very clear idea of what he wants, and this very particular kind of finish view. And he knows how to get it. And so writing it down in a story Bible that people can keep referring back to, making that a living document that grows as the project grows. We used to have something called Story Hour too, at a bunch of studios I worked at, which is just open office hours, where people could come and ask any question they wanted of the story team. We would give presentations, just be like, this week we're talking about this character, just 20 minutes during lunch, people can come and learn about a piece of the game or learn about the themes and ask any question. I've also put up posters, like guerrilla tactics. We've put up like posters around the office saying, hey, here's what you need to know about this part of the game, or hey, yeah, like, it's good to, you have to be careful that you have visitors to the office, but besides that, but yeah, I mean, anything you can do to get people to understand the story and how it ties into their work. Like, most people in games are natural storytellers. You just have to help them understand how their work helps tell the story, and then they're completely on board and they get it.
So without going into too deep of detail, because this could be partially related to a current project, what's it like working on a project that has literal decades of lore related to the IP, and maybe a creator that is very passionate about his visions about what that world looks like?
What's it like? It's great. It's great, no complaints. No, I'm being facetious. It's really wonderful to have that much lore, right? I mean, it's a rich vein to mine for what you want. I think as long as you have freedom to carve out your own space there and you're not completely bound by it, then I think that's fine. I'm speaking purely in the abstract. This has nothing to do with any job I have now or ever have. Yeah, I mean, the creative directors I've had, again, I think I've been really lucky in them because they have had strong visions for the game, and I think sometimes, people don't know what they want, and you have to keep putting things in front of them and be like, is this it? Is this it? Is this it? And I've seen that a lot. But I think when they come into the project, knowing this is the project that I want to make, help me make a story that expresses this, then that is the ideal situation, and I'm really lucky that I've been there many times in my career.
I was thinking about mechanics and game type, and like if you have a dexterity game, like how does that, and I assume it's kind of like a Ouroboros, like how does that integrate or negotiate with game writing and narrative design so that you don't end up with two flavors conflicting with each other?
Good communication. I do think it depends on when you come into the project. Like, a lot of game companies unfortunately bring in writers way too late, so the game has already been built, and they're like, here, fill in these little boxes with some story, please. And at that point, no, it is going to feel it's like a coat of paint that's spackling over a whole bunch of problems, and it's not going to feel integrated. You really have to start at the same time. As a game writer, I have to be aware of the vectors for telling my story, right? Like if it's a small little indie game, I probably shouldn't write my big epic elf fantasy, right? There's not going to be the space or the cinematics or the time to tell that story in that space. If the game can't afford cinematics, right, and all they can have is storyboards, then that's going to affect what I'm writing as well. And I really like to go around and dig through the gameplay sections, go talk to the gameplay designers and figure out what they have so that I can figure out how I can use that to tell a story. And it's great to collaborate because they have wonderful ideas of like, oh, you could do this, or have you thought of doing this with the UI? And it's like, no, I never did. And that's when it becomes this really magical sort of alchemy of story mechanics. But you need to have that right from the start, I think.
Yeah, and that being regarding like dialogue tree writing, is that gameplay leading the writer leading the gameplay when what your choices will impact the gameplay itself specifically?
Yeah. When you're writing a game with choices like that, you have to know where the story is going to go, and then you create opportunities within it for branching if you want, or to get you to the place you're going to go. So the mechanic of, yes, we're going to have choices, would have to pre-exist the story. I'd be like, okay, now I have to write a story with interesting choices. Okay. Yeah. And then the dialogue, that would be a narrative designer who sort of creates the flow of that. And then the writer would come along and fill it with beautiful images.
And would it make sense to maybe mention what the difference between a narrative designer and a game writer, because some people may not be.
It's like that question that no one can answer. So it used to be the big question, like, what is the narrative designer? What is the sound of one hand clapping? But narrative designers are people who work more with systems and the structure of stories, and writers work more with language and words. But there's a lot of crossover. I do a lot of narrative design as a writer. Some narrative designers write. We've talked about how some designers write. But I will say that generally, writers will do narrative design more than narrative designers will write. But that is not a hard and fast rule. So who knows, actually, what a designer does? If you find out, tell me.
So, talking a lot about, what are some of the unique sort of tools that like narrative in games can bring compared to other mediums. As the inverse of that, I know like a really common challenge in writing is avoiding like ludonarrative dissonance. Like,
oh, you said it.
This idea of the player just like goes off to do like a side quest instead of doing the emergency or something. Like, what are some of the ways, especially in like an open world game or a really big scope game, that what are some strategies that like you use to try and like mitigate that, or like some particular challenge that you've run into there?
That's a particular sticky wicket, isn't it? Like when they're like, the world is going to end, you have to go now, but there's a corner, I need to pick that up. Right, I saw like the dog is good and running again, right? So I get it, I know what you're talking about. It really is, again, I'm gonna say this word a lot, it is collaboration and communication. You have to work with your level designers, you have to work with other people on the team to make sure that the game is not sending a different message than you want it to be sending at that point in the story. And it depends on the game, like there's things you can do. I mean, sometimes you'll see a sort of desperate, this is the point of no return sign on there, which I think players appreciate, but that really is an act of desperation on the part of the dev team going, all else has failed, you're ignoring the world is going to blow up stuff, so we just need to let you know that we've reached that place. But yeah, I mean, the list of things you can do is really long. I would say it really depends on what the project is and what you come up with your level designers and gameplay designers and everybody else.
Are there any examples that you felt particularly proud of in your own work?
No. I don't like talking about it. No, I genuinely can't think of a time I solved that well. I've just been very lucky that I haven't run into that headlong because there was good communication along the way. I think most of my games have largely avoided that. I think the only case where I think we failed a little bit is in Death of the Outsider, where Billy Lurk is supposed to be a reformed assassin, and yet you can absolutely slaughter your way through that entire game, and in fact are encouraged to do so in many ways. If you play it the way I play it, you cannot help but kill people. I try to stealth through, but no, it's pure chaos all the way.
Hey, so this question is coming from, I'm an intimacy professional. And I'm curious about, like, I know you work on games with a lot of intimacy. It's a big topic of conversation in my field about video games. How is the topic of intimacy introduced and then interdepartmentally handled in like, I know you probably can't, like in a game with a lot of intimacy tied into it? How is it handled, like both narrative, who introduces it, and how does it hit? Yeah, how does it go through the pipeline?
I mean, there was a lot of discussion about it in games with romanceable characters. It's just assumed that you're going to have something like that. I will tell you that we hire a lot of consultants, people like yourself who come in and can particularly work with the actors and make things safe for them. And I think people think that it's like, ooh, it's a video game studio, people are going to be really immature about it, and it's not safe, and that's just never been the case. On any game I've worked on, Playboy the Mansion, my very first game, my big complaint about it was boring. Like, where's the sex? This isn't sexy at all. Like, why do I care about this magazine that I have to sell now, right? So, it involves a lot of consultants and communication and people just being adults about it and understanding that it is a sensitive topic. That would be my very vague answer about that. Yeah.
Okay. I was curious because as an intimacy coordinator, we're actually not allowed to work in the design phase beyond choreography given to us by a director. But I also started working in intimacy design, which is actually coming in at the beginning of story and designing intimacy in there, which because of all the new SAG rules about intimacy coordinating, I'm not allowed to call that intimacy coordinating. So I was curious to hear, like, I'm just curious how it works, like beyond like just coming in on like mocap days and doing the intimacy coordinating job, like before you get there. I was just so curious about that process.
I don't think there's a lot I can say about it. I'll be really honest, because most of my experience with that is on my current project, and I can't really say anything.
Gotcha.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
It happens.
Yes. One game that won't be boring.
Hi there. I'm really curious to hear about some of your favorite ways to do non-verbal storytelling. So maybe to convey emotional beats or emotional moments or story beats without dialogue or text.
So how do I use everything at my disposal besides dialogue? Yeah, I mean, so some of the things that I like, right, that maybe I haven't necessarily done myself. In Oxenfree, if you've played that, like dialogue options sort of fade away and drift off, and it mirrors the sort of shyness or the reluctance or a missed opportunity in a conversation. I thought that's a really clever way to use UI. Sometimes you play a game and like the objectives scroll by really fast if you're thinking really quickly. So there's cool stuff you can do with UI. I think we all know the really obvious stuff like environment art and lighting and signs and control were a whole thing. Like there was a whole guide I had for what tone you use and from whose perspective you're writing this and trying to think about what the purpose of it was. And you have to be, every little bit of signage had a lot of thought behind it, right? And it's just those little details that if you get them right, can really just set the mood of the world in the game and do a lot of heavy lifting for you. So you don't have to have someone say, oh, I think there's bad stuff ahead. You've got environment art doing it. Or you can just have, the lighting get very menacing as it goes off into the distance and have the level design compressing. I mean, I think there's a lot of psychological stuff you can do. Even a low hum in the controller can make you nervous. I mean, there's everything at your disposal, and it's up to you to decide how you want to use it.
So I think throughout this talk, interdepartmental communication has been a big theme. And I'm just wondering, like sometimes when communication is not happening, how do you initiate these communication? What are some tactics that you like encountered throughout the years?
So people send out newsletters, if they, it's just like, hey, this is what we worked on this week. We often have, the chat inside the office. People will post big updates there just to let the people know what they're working on. And sometimes you'll be like, oh, I didn't even know we had that in the game, right? And then you'll go over and you'll talk to them, and this cool new idea comes out of that. Are you saying it's like someone's mad at you and they're not talking to you?
Oh, no. What about that? Like that small part of the department that you're like, oh, I didn't see that you're working on this. Like, how does that communication, how do you initiate, like reach out and communicating with them?
I worked at one studio where they did this really cool thing where it was just called Dev Day. And everyone would set up a little station for what their team was working on and just have like a little demo or whatever. And you would just go around from department to department and just talk to people and see what they were working on. It was just one day a month, it was chill and we had snacks and it was really nice. And it really gave you a chance to not just see what they were working on, but meet the people and find out what interested them and what their ideas were. I just thought that was a really great idea. And I've also talked about some of the other stuff, like the story hours we used to hold and posters that we put up and stuff like that. Yeah, anything you can do to get the message out. Paper planes, do it.
Yeah, thank you.
So in terms of when you're creating systems and like tools for writing, both when you're writing and when you're collaborating with other writers, what are some things that have worked for you in your process, like either software-wise or this is the system that I do when I'm collaborating with people?
So you're talking about like the pipeline or the actual tools?
Dealer's choice.
Okay. So we have some pretty phenomenal tools in AAA. Like a lot of the studios I've worked at make their own tools. So we have this proprietary software in-house, and some of it is really the most cutting edge stuff that probably the public won't find out about for 5 or 6 more years, or unless you go to GDC and someone happens to do a talk on it. But it's pretty extraordinary what you can do with a lot of these tools, and it already meshes departments there. It already meshes different disciplines. Like there are tools where I can type lines into the tool, tag them with emotions, hit a button, and it will play a little mini cinematic for me right there on the spot with the emotions that I tagged it with. And I can hear the voices acted out right there in my browser within seconds. So I can figure out what this scene is going to look like and if that's working. And sometimes it's like, oh no. Anger does not work in this scene. And like you can, rewrite it on the spot. It can turn into this really obsessive game where you're like, is this the right emotion? Is this the right emotion? You'll just go through all the tags. But so tools like that exist. There are usually really elaborate pipelines because AAA games are enormous. And everyone, you'll spend a lot of time in the beginning of working on any AAA game, figuring out what these pipelines look like. Who's responsible for what? Who owns this? Who participates in this? Who has a say in this? Who approves this? At what stage does each person do these things? And then just pray that your tools are working at every stage of that so people can actually do the things that they need to do. But yeah, I kind of forgot what your question was because I've been looking for a while. Tools and systems, which ones do I use?
Right, that like help with the writing or help with collaborating with other writers. Like either for big AAA or when you're writing, like do you use like Obsidian or like this?
I have used Obsidian. I mean, I think of tools like Obsidian and like some of these proprietary tools as sort of containing pipelines, right? Because it starts with the writers getting the text in to this narrative design format. And then you can pretty much, that text then will go through the whole pipeline within the tool. I wish I could show you an example of it, but obviously I cannot. But all AAA studios have really good tools, is all I can say. But Google Docs, I mean, shared documents that everyone can see the same thing is just a huge thing. I fade in for writing screenplays, though I have worked at some places that still use Final Draft. Baffling, but they do. Even up until Microsoft Word just got really horrendous with the AI, you could use that. But yeah, I mean, anything where people can have a sort of shared source of information is the most important tool, I think.
And we have like 9 minutes left, so.
Everyone all at once, go. Speed round. Or whoever you want.
Have you ever worked on a game that, or been drawn to games that had a powerful social impact or civic engagement as part of the gameplay? And do you think that could ever work in a AAA type game?
I am very drawn to games like that. I think they are incredibly important, and I like a game with a good message. I think they're especially impactful when they don't get didactic about it, right? When you're just like, this was really fun, and now I hate people who hurt puppies because they're bad. But I think AAA has tried, certainly, I think that there is this prevailing belief that AAA tries to stay neutral politically and culturally, and I don't think they actually do. I think that there is a lot of quiet messaging that takes place in AAA games. And I think the people who make them play these small political indie games and love them too, and you will see them show up in various ways in AAA work. I don't know who's next, I'm afraid to call on anyone.
I'm not sure who's next, but you're pointing over there, maybe there, yeah, sure.
So you spent a lot of time in the AAA space. What is it about that particularly that entices you, and do you ever find yourself wanting to go to like a smaller scale?
I love AAA because I can specialize there. Like, I get to just do pure writing, which is not something I would get to do. Like I mentioned, when I first started out in games, like I wore a lot of hats. So I've had that experience. And I just like the writing part of it. Like, that's the part I'm good at and that I like. So it's hard to imagine that. Plus, I'm just going to say it, it is really exhilarating to work on a project that everybody knows, right? And that they are looking forward to, and you go to GDC and there's a skyscraper that has your game advertised full length on it, and you're like, I'm working on that, wow, that's pretty cool. And there's you're working on games that you've loved too, and you've always wanted to work on, and it becomes a dream come true. So there are a lot of reasons why I personally love AAA and would not want to leave it, and sort of lament that it does seem to be going through something right now. But I think a lot of people like wearing a lot of hats, and they like having a lot of say and control over the story and being able to really, make the game their own in a way that they can't in AAA, right? You have your little part in AAA and you play your part, and hopefully everyone plays theirs, and when there's that many moving pieces, a lot can go wrong. But hopefully everything goes right and you make something incredible together. And I think on smaller games, when it comes out, it feels much more personal, right? But when a AAA game comes out, it's like your team won the Super Bowl, right? It's like, yeah, we did it. We all did it together. We got this thing over the line. So it's a matter of taste for me. It's got to be AAA.
Well, I think over there.
Yeah, I was wondering, now that acting in games is more of a thing, do you ever find yourself writing to an actor's strengths or like editing for that? And what's that been like?
So I've actually worked on games where we improv with the actors, where we went into the studio with a version of the lines, worked with the actors, had them do a lot of improv, and then came out with a very different set of lines, and try to catch the cadence of their voice, like expressions. Eventually, they're going to know that character's voice better than you are, and so it's trying to match that to sort of the natural rhythms of the way they speak, or you're trying to cast someone who feels like a good fit for the role. So, like, what language are they using? What vocabulary? You know, oh, they always sort of use this word. Is that something I can integrate into the way this person's speaking? And you really do try to get as close with the character and the actor as you can. And I just found that improv is a really good way to do that. It's easier if it's a comedy game, I'll tell you that much. Just because comedians are brilliant at improv and very good at just sort of winging it and coming up with funnier lines than I ever will. So.
One last question.
How do you balance getting lost into your own creative ideas versus what you're supposed to deliver to millions of users?
No pressure. I don't think of them as users. You put yourself into the story no matter what it is. And I think anyone who writes knows that there is you in that story. And so it doesn't matter if you're writing it for someone else, or if you're writing this huge story that millions of users are going to play, it's still your story, and it came from inside of you, and it's influenced by what you were going through. And I sometimes can remember exactly like what the weather was like, and for when I wrote certain scenes, or how I was feeling that day. And so when I'm playing the game, like it all comes back to me. It's that personal. And you know, if we want to like talk about AI again, AI can never do that, right? It can't create those lines that really just feel unexpected and personal and of the moment in that scene in a way that are really going to resonate. And I watch writers pour their souls into lines of dialogue and write scenes that make you cry and make you laugh, and all of that comes from who they are, and that's their story and their experience that they're putting into these lines, and that's what makes a game sing. And it doesn't matter how big or how small, if a writer is doing that, you're going to feel it. I think that's it.